Thanks for joining. I'm very happy to be here with some of our smart friends from around the world. Today, we wanted to talk about research effectiveness. We'll be presenting the Research Effectiveness Award at SMR Congress coming up in September. And we thought it was a great opportunity to hear from not only past recipients, past honorees, and what made their research so effective, but other thinkers, other diverse thought leaders from around the world, to really just kind of have an informal discussion and hear what wealth of experience in the insights and strategy world has to offer about what even is research effectiveness, and more importantly, what are the principles, what are the lessons, what's the collective wisdom we can compile to let everybody make their research more effective. So I am Hunter Thurman. I'm president of Alpha Diver. We're a research and insights firm. We use a high degree of decision science in our work. Happy to share my experience. But before we jump into the conversation, let's just go around and I'll call on somebody, and then when you've introduced yourself, you call on the next person, so we don't interrupt each other. I'll just go to my right. Liubov, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Liubov. I'm doing insights work in Electrolux as a Global Consumer Insights Director for Care. And I'm also volunteering a lot within the insights industry. So I'm a counsel in SMR and I'm a member in Merlin. I'm also supporting some startups and very excited to be part of this collaborative discussion about what makes the research or insight work to be successful or effective.
Who's next?
Should I call someone else? So yeah. I'm calling Priscilla.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm Priscilla McKinney. I'm the CEO and Mama Bird over here at Little Bird Marketing. And I am a content marketing digital agency with a specialization in the market research arena. I am an SMR member, and I have a background with a degree in cultural anthropology. So I like to just remind people in market research that I understand these nerds. They're the best kind of nerds there ever could be. And so I lead a team that really supports this industry to make sure that they really represent the value that market research brings to brands and make sure that that's represented at a high enough level so that those findings can get implemented. So that's what I do day in and day out. But I love more than anything to actually talk with people and see what kind of research they're doing, because I'm not doing the research, but I am supporting this industry. So I'll kick that over to Belinda Brown from Gazelle Global.
Hi, thanks, Priscilla. I'm Belinda Brown from Gazelle Global. I'm the Director of Marketing and Business Development for Gazelle. I've been with the company about 6 years, but you could say I grew up in the industry. The company is headed by Anne Brown, who also happens to be my mother. So I grew up in this industry. I love to give back to it. I sit on the board of directors for the Insights Association. Was the Greater New York chapter. Is now the Central Atlantic chapter. We're a corporate member of SMR, have been for many, many, many years. And I love this industry, and I'm really excited to get to talk to you guys today.
Who's next, Belinda?
Ooh, Carmen.
Hello, everybody. I'm Carmen Soare. I'm the marketing director of Synevo, Romania. Synevo is the market leader in diagnostic laboratory in Romania, but it's part of Medicover Group. Medicover Group is a Swedish-based healthcare company. And I worked for this company for 5 years with a background of 20 years in financial services, in marketing, all the time marketing. So looking forward for this discussion today. I enjoyed a lot the Congress last year in Toronto, and I will invite Henry to continue.
I think that leaves you, Henry.
Hi, everyone. Henry Talbot. I'm the research lead at Te Mana Whakaatu Classification Office. We're an independent media regulator in New Zealand, a government agency. We put age ratings on movies and games, among many other things, and do a lot of work in research and education to ensure New Zealanders have safe and positive engagement with media that they consume. I'll pass that on to.
I think that's all of us.
It's all of us, yeah.
Last but not least, yeah, I mean, clearly, really, it's interesting. All very consistent. You know, we're trying to understand human beings, why they do what they do, all in very different capacities and very, very different complementary industries, which was part of why we were so interested in this discussion, because there's just a lot. You know, diversity means a lot of different things, and there's a lot of diversity of thought and perspective on this call. So, looking forward to it. Henry and Carmen, you have both been past, I think last year, recent recipients of research effectiveness recognition from SOMAR. Maybe we'll start with you, and maybe, you know, to kick off, what we thought we would do is just share a bit of the story about what the actual project or initiative that earned the recognition was, and you know, in as formal or informal a fashion as you like, some of the lessons, some of the principles that you've observed. And I think as we share, we'll start to see some commonalities and some themes. So Carmen, would you mind sharing a little bit about the recognition you guys received?
Yeah, we were ranked, we won the Silver Award, Global Award last year for this category. And it was for a very important project for us. We introduced virtual reality assisted blood drawing for kids in Romania. And it was a very, very successful project. Why this project? Mainly because around 200,000 kids actually are using our services, so they have their blood drawn in our blood drawing points in Romania. So this is a sizable, let's say, segment that we really wanted to improve their experience, because we know that 68% of kids actually, they have needle phobia, and some of them, around 10%, they also have blood injury and injection phobia. And this type of phobias, actually, they might have a long-term impact on their attitudes towards avoiding or not avoiding healthcare. So we really were committed to improve that one. And since we started with an internal research, we found out about virtual reality analgesia. So it is used around the world in many hospitals, in different medical procedures. So we really wanted to have something for blood drawing. And this is how it started, actually. So we conducted qualitative research involving both parents, kids, and nurses. So we made an empathy map, and we portrayed all the pains, all the emotions, and at the end we were able to have a recommendation for a virtual reality story. And that was put in place. We had 3 iterations, 3 prototypes. We tested each of them, and in the end, we had a successful procedure, and we tested it again, and it had a very positive impact. So just to give you an example, 40% of kids, actually kids reported 40% decrease in pain and in the perception of anxiety as well. And 97% of kids who went through this type of virtual reality blood drawing, they would repeat the procedure, which is awesome, I would say. And I would also mention that apart from these positive results, we also generated additional business for the company, because we ran a campaign, and in the end, we generated in all the locations where we had this virtual reality equipment, we generated more new customers, and it was in the end a very successful project. Now we are just, as a side note, now we are developing the 3rd narration, virtual reality narration, and this time is for adults as well. So that was in short our project.
Wow. 97% said they would
repeat it. Yes.
That's impressive. So were there any principles as you've reflected on that and as you've thought about then the adult program? I mean, it's incredibly effective and it's very, very cool application of technology. Are there any kind of lessons that, or principles about effective research that emerged from that?
I would say it started from a real, I would say, business need. And we had the alignment of all the stakeholders from marketing people to, let's say, our CEO and our blood drawing points managers who really embarked in this journey. So alignment of the stakeholders, I would say it is critical. And they were aligned maybe because this is a generous purpose in the end. It's a generous objectives. You want to improve the life and experience of your customers, and the more sensitive customers you have, so you definitely want to improve their experience. So I think this is definitely one of the most important, I would say, criteria or starting points. And then, of course, the perseverance that we never gave up. So we had 3 iterations. The first one was really awful. So yeah, perseverance, it also helps. And trying to measure every iteration, definitely, this also helps. So, and we didn't intend to increase the revenues of the company. So it was only to improve the experience of these kids. But in the end, yeah, if you do good, probably this also generates additional revenues.
Very cool. I think we could talk about this for 45 minutes, but I'm going to resist. Henry, would you like to, thank you, Carmen. And I'm sure we'll talk more about it. Henry, would you like to share your story relative to the actual Research Effectiveness Award last year?
Yeah, so so we did a 3-part research program focused on young people in New Zealand, young people's views and experiences with online pornography. So when we started, well, before we started in 2018, we knew that this was, knew it was an issue, knew a lot of young people in New Zealand and around the world were accessing this stuff that, wasn't meant for them. And that there was a lot of concern in the community about this, but very little evidence or understanding about it. So that was the kind of initial problem, I suppose. So the purpose of it was to put together some baseline evidence and information that could be used across the country by different stakeholders, by government, so that we could, start a conversation about how to talk about this issue in a way that was going to be more useful and help, help the well-being of young people, and assist with some more, cohesive policy around the issue. So, so yeah, 3-part project. So we started with a nationally representative survey of over 2014 to 17-year-olds. The survey looked at all sorts of aspects, whether people had seen pornography, how they had seen it, how they came across it the first time, their views about the potential impacts of it, the kinds of things they had seen, and what they would like to see to improve things. So all sorts of stuff we did in that one. And that was the first, comprehensive wide-scale survey about this issue in New Zealand. Following on from that, we did additional projects to kind of fill in the gaps. So one of them was that we did a content analysis of the most popular pornography that was being viewed in New Zealand, which was a completely different type of research, but also lent itself to the expertise of our office specifically because people working with us, their job is to examine and assess and analyze media content. So that was really helpful in that a lot of this was about, I'll talk about not wanting to speak past young people, but speak with young people. And part of that is you get information and data, for example, about the kinds of things young people might be seeing or what they're worried about. And we wanted to kind of track that against, okay, what is the stuff people are seeing most often, to get a better idea of that, so that we're talking about the same thing that we think we're talking about. And following off of that, the final bit of the project was interviews across New Zealand, again with 14 to 17-year-olds. We did just over 50 interviews, obviously very sensitive personal subject matter. So a lot of work going in there to make it safe and respectful, drawing on the learning from the previous stages in the report and in the research, and just making sure we got an in-depth view from young people about how these issues are playing out for them. So that ended up being very successful. Had young people were very willing to talk about it. Following the release of the research, then we went into doing everything we could to make sure that these messages got out there. We got a lot of media coverage. We had good relationships with stakeholders around the country, and there was just a lot of focus on packaging together information in a way that could be picked up. So thinking about some principles of the research and things that I think went really well in order for it to be effective. One of them was real, genuine engagement with a wide variety of stakeholders and experts throughout the project. So before we started anything, we were talking to researchers, we were talking to people involved in youth organizations, people in government, education, and so on. So trying to get a grip on what the issues were for people, and to understand the issues. And a good thing about this is just to ensure you get a more robust methodology and a better analysis. But the other good thing about that is that by bringing on those people from the beginning and continuing that conversation, we've made sure that the findings and the topic was specifically useful, not just to our office and our particular work, but to a broad range of people working on the issue or for whom that was relevant in New Zealand. Another one was just about communicating the findings, which goes from the analysis and reporting to what we did afterwards, just to ensure that the way we're talking about it is always, meaningful and resonates with those who it's most important to reach. So that includes young people. So we learnt a lot from them, and we're asking them, what do you think about the way adults talk about this issue, in the media and analysis in your schools and your homes? And they had a lot to say about that. And that really shaped the way that we then later communicated about it, and the way we encouraged other adults, other people working with young people to then talk about it. It also meant that the findings were easy to pick up by a lot of other groups across the country. So it's been incorporated. We're trying to make sure it's clear, simple, framed in a way that's not off-putting to people. And because it was picked up by so many different groups across the country, that was another key way to ensure that the impact was widespread, because it's not all coming from our office. That goes from education, youth organizations, etc. So one of the key things there was, for the first time, getting pornography to be included in the national healthy relationship and sexuality education. And then we worked with the Ministry of Education to put together a comprehensive module for teachers to be able to use across the country in order to have those conversations.
That's really interesting. That I love that line of "Don't speak past, speak with." And it sounds like, as I was hearing you talk, that was this red thread, as many say, through all of that it wasn't, you didn't assume you knew what the problem was or how they perceived it. It was this speak with. I think that's really, simple, but a very potent principle. Belinda, I think the story that you, I think we're thinking of, it reminded me at least of what little, as I heard kind of the quick voiceover of kind of speaking past, with the example that you you had thought of. Did I get that right, or do you want to follow on to Henry's?
I'd love to. That's an incredible through line, I think, and I just wanted to speak to Carmen and Henry's point to Carmen's point about generous objectives and the work that Henry was able to do. I think that the work that we do in general has this incredible implications for the world that we live in. Both examples, we're talking to youth. The youth's perception of the healthcare system and what their sexual wellness, their relationship wellness, their emotional wellness is going to look like in the future. These business objectives, sometimes I think it's really helpful to zoom out and look at what the work that we do, the effect that it has on the world that we live in. Methodologically speaking, I saw some alignment with what happened in our research study, which was essentially that on the front end, there were some issues with, we had an international airline that was looking to speak to their customers about the travel service and what was going on, and they were initially trying to work from their own two lists based on airline travel based on mileage, and some of the customers didn't even have mileage accounts, and there were some real fault lines going on in the methodology up front. And then what was most importantly to me, they didn't have a way of providing incentives to these people. They wanted them to do a, in person in the Miami area in an airport. No one's doing that for for a lack of incentive. That's just not going to happen. They were then providing something like, 5,000 miles, which if any of you have traveled internationally, which I'm sure we all have, that really doesn't go very far. So, there were some problems and they really needed the assistance of a partner in a qualified market research operations firm, which is what we are. So, there were some methodological problems up front. And then to Henry's point, I think they were trying to speak, at these customers or past them and not speak to them. They ignored some really important cultural nuances. They wanted, for instance, exclusively Spanish speaking folks to come in for an in-person interview when the region they were looking in is largely bilingual. There were just a lot of sort of missteps that were going on that could have been all sort of solved. And by the way, of course, they wanted this all done in a matter of about 2 days. So, we were in the field, by Saturday, Sunday. Groups were held on Monday. We heard about this information the Wednesday prior. So, it's lovely that we were able to solve for those issues really quickly. And I credit our, team for that and our years of expertise. And there's something to be said about the ability to have really effective partners around the world. And we're really proud of that. But, we might have saved everyone a headache and a lot of money on either end, having solved for those problems up front. So actually, with the help of Priscilla, we were able to develop a bidding prep worksheet. And that was one of our major takeaways, was that a lot of this stuff really just needs to be solved for on the front end, and then I'll save a whole bunch of problems on the back end, and not having to go back and redo groups, or they didn't even have a screener in the beginning because they had decided that they knew exactly who was going to be participating in this work, and so we had to create a screener with them, which then didn't have a rejection question. Like there were things that were just missing, some kind of best practices stuff that fell through the cracks, and our worksheet really serves to solve some of those problems up front and really get those specs clear and well communicated. And I think that was our major takeaway. But there's a lot of stuff here that aligns, and that I was noting when Carmen and Henry were talking about just sort of the missteps that we see and the gaps in people's knowledge, and the way that we conduct research really does matter for these business outcomes, and for, as I said, for the world that we live in.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, that's sometimes it's amazing how much you can overlook the easy stuff, and it's like the easy stuff's not the easy stuff. So that idea of templatizing kind of the basics, if I heard that right, it's all, and even doing like a postmortem of like, okay, what would the template or the worksheet have fixed and solved? That's a process. I mean, I think a lot of organizations have like a briefing document, but no one ever really gives it much thought. Right. I think that's a really tangible, principle that's easy to overlook. Priscilla, it sounds like you had a hand in that one. Is that what you were going to talk about, or what were you going to share with us?
Well, I have a hand in making sure that the people who really are qualified to do this type of research are the people who are tapped to do the research, right? Because we all know that it's hard to grow our companies, hard to grow our, our research teams, hard to grow our whatever kind of, firm that we're in. And so when we do earn this business, it is a matter of, to Belinda's point, have you chosen the right partner? Because, and I'm just going to come back to both of what Carmen and Henry said about, can you imagine if they had done this without someone with in-country experience or any kind of cultural sensitivity? I mean, it would be this data would mean nothing, right? And would you check it off? Would you get the box done? Sure. But would it have that kind of impact? No, it wouldn't. And so what I see mistakes in this industry happen all the time is that people, don't ask these questions up front. And it's not just about a company building a website, and I can make companies look really good in the professional legitimacy, and they've got a lot of logos they've collected over the years. But it is about where are they able to just stop the presses at the beginning, like Belinda says, where her team just says, whoa, happy to do this project for you. What are we trying to do again? What are the outcomes? And let's make sure that we have cultural sensitivity covered. Let's make sure that we have in-country real boots on the ground. Let's make sure that we have covered empathy with moderators. I mean, I think about how sensitive it is to do this kind of research with children. This is a frightening moment, for them. And I think across both of those things, it's so imperative who we're working with. And I guess that's my reaction to what you guys are talking about, which is why I love this industry so much. But I'll just kind of extricate myself from your work because I don't do research, and just, give my 2 cents about what I see those failings. By the time it gets to a Carmen or it gets to a Henry, I think these people are so expert that they really are thinking about this effectiveness. But where I see so many companies mess up, kind of to Belinda's point, is what was the secondary research that they could have looked at before they even got to what is the primary research we need? And I don't do research, but I largely make incredible use of secondary research in order to help clients say, and now this is the primary research you need to have done, right? And there's so much out there that's available to us, because in the end, really effective research, in my opinion, is a blend of primary and secondary, right? Because that one informs the other and sets it up. And so that's what makes these people, so successful, because at the point where it comes to that high level expertise, the expert that's going to run this program, it's so tight what needs to be done. But in my world, people overlook secondary research all the time. And it's so sad because so many companies also do it in order to showcase their expertise and what they are capable of. And so people should really learn from that secondary research, and secondary research to me should have that broad swath of, isn't that interesting? Is this the cultural trend? Is this what's happening? And it should be that soup that we're swimming in that creates these amazing hypotheses that then can, get a further down the line.
I think that's a really simple kind of reframe, that it's, secondary research isn't to answer the question, it's to define what the question is to answer. I've never thought of it that way. I've always kind of thought of it as like, well, there's secondary and there's primary and there's the question and what's the best way to answer it. But it's spot on, and you guys talked about stakeholder interviews, stakeholder alignment, hearing, Henry, you talked about even the way they talk about this. That's all to me kind of secondary stuff that then sets up the primary research to really focus in on the question to be answered. And Carmen, it sounds like you guys had a lot of sort of patience with your stakeholders that they let you iterate. I know it was kind of primary research you were doing, but in a way you were working through it to really define what the true objective was. And that just makes a ton of sense. It's not a this or that, it's a this then that, or this so that this can be all the more powerful. That's awesome. Thanks, Priscilla. Okay, Liubov, last but not least, you've had the benefit of hearing everyone's stories. What would you like to contribute?
So the way how in SMR we stated the challenge is to choose the research projects that provides actionable results with the clear benefits for the society and for the business. And all the examples that you brought in, so I think that it meets both directions. So it makes a big difference and it solves the issue for people, like with this blood check and blood gathering, or with the kind of educating the Gen Z and the way how they educate about sexual life today. So all these examples spot on. And for me, in my point of view, so what makes the research successful is the outcome, what the project does and what it contributes, and the impact is the most important element to assess the research. Obviously, either good for the business or in ideal world, good for the society, for the people, because the business needs to improve the life of people. So, and especially working at the big brands, we have to think about not only the problems that we can address, but also we should think about the problems we should start speaking about, because we have such a potential to aggregate the forces. And if we cannot solve the issues ourselves, we at least can start talking about it. So that would be probably my 5 cents. But I'm very happy to propose to tweak the conversation in another angle, because what Priscilla was sharing is the story, what makes the research successful. And this is the right angle and the element to think about what it makes us successful, because it's exactly an opposite. So what it makes unsuccessful. And I think that you mentioned sharing your story, that actually having no vision where you want to come and what is your question, that is probably one of the typical mistake to have in successful research, because you don't know what is how your success look like, so you cannot describe it, so you have no kind of big idea behind that. And that's one of the element to have in successful research. And another thing that actually sparkle thoughts in my mind when you were talking is about that the data might stay to be the data in the hands of not professional people. So what we are doing is not necessarily working on the particular methodology. So we're not celebrating particular methodology. We're celebrating the outcome. When you can do several projects or when you can apply your knowledge to distill insight out of the data. And this is fundamental. And the way how you're going to do that would be the way applicable to the current project. So another mistake is to treat another project as a previous one. So every project is the unique one. And what is fundamental is to discover insight. So I remember when we were traveling in Africa and we saw people washing with soaps and products was declining. We just figured out that the woman with whom we talked, they mentioned that they like these bubbles and the foam. So we have added the foam. So we make them to be sure that the soap is actually doing the work, because this is the language they were speaking. And you need to talk to people sometimes. And in another time, it might be different approach you have to apply, like understanding the market dynamics, the landscape of the competition, calculate the risks, especially if you want to launch something big, like what we are doing now in Electrolux. We are developing the machines and appliances, and obviously the development is a long period of time, from 3 to 12 years, and it depends on the sophistication of the solution that we are working on. And it's all about defining and calculating the risks and evaluating the success and the size of it, and trying to prepare the right plans to support the initiatives and predicting the future. So,
but what I hear you saying that's so amazing from Electrolux, and you talk about like this effective, research, is that what you didn't do is go in and tell the respondent, no, you don't need foam, like you're doing it wrong. They want foam. That's how they are understanding that this product is being scientifically, successful. Well, if it takes the foam to do that, can you imagine if if Carmen or Henry went in and we're like, well, this is the only way that it can be done. That kind of like an ego drive in how you set up research is absolutely going to kill that effectiveness. And so I love that. I think what I hear in that through line there is a lack of ego from the person looking for that answer in order to truly listen, to the research respondent.
Yeah, I think that you are spot on. And obviously, what we are doing with the new products, we kind of empowered personally to change the behavior of people. And sometimes, working now in Electrolux, working in the company that puts sustainability in the center of innovation process, we are investigating the ways how we can support people with the right equipment that they can live more sustainable life that would be better for everyone in the society. And this means changing the behavior and changing the patterns when it's really needed. Because in some cases it might be needed and you can provide the products that can deliver the benefits, and maybe if it satisfies people, for example, I worked many years in Colgate-Palmolive, that's why I brought this example of Protex, and for toothpaste, for example, in Nigeria. So they like bright colors, so we start producing for Africa bright toothpaste because that's what makes them excited about the products. And it's not really change the quality of things. Obviously, when you operate in other businesses, and it's really meaningful to adjust the behavior of people, because this is the hardest way and the hardest job to do. So to think about step by step what you're gonna say and how you're gonna communicate to adjust their behavior and to educate. Obviously, the education is a big thing. But yeah, returning back to the point, maybe we can go through other point of views when it comes to unsuccessful research. That would be very interesting angle to hear other points of views.
Yeah, this is great. I mean, a couple of things, and I've been taking tons of notes here. A couple of things, that I'm hearing. One thing we talk a lot about, you mentioned behavior change. You talked about, look, this isn't trying to change their behavior. This is trying to empower them to solve a problem. I think a lot of times we get to business problems and think about, well, what do we want to have happen? And it's really important to look at that. It's that empathetic lens of what is the problem the consumer sees that they need to resolve, and connecting those. And sometimes there really can be that disconnect. And so a lot of that listening component of research versus just what's the answer and how do we get them to do what we want them to do. It's not just being empathetic for sort of flowery sake. It actually creates a much more effective program. So I think that's been something that I've heard across it. One of the things that we talk a lot about, you mentioned this exactly, I think everybody touched on this to a degree, is everybody wants actionable insights. But oftentimes the question is, well, in the same breath, everybody wants to grow their business, right? And if you start with an objective of how do we grow our business, it's very difficult to then have very tangible, actionable insights. You have to drill down. And so, Belinda, to your point about a little bit of templatizing, one of the things we talk about a lot is, if anybody remembers as kids, Mad Libs, where it's like a sentence where you fill in the verb, the noun, the adjective. Who needs to drive what decision in order to drive what in the market, which will be measured how? If we can't answer that sentence, fill in those blanks or something close to that, the secondary research, the stakeholder input, those things need more work, because when everybody's very clear on exactly what they want to have happen, and for as much as, like, for example, Henry, your work was able to be lift and leveraged, you understood what the core behavioral problem or the core behavioral challenge that you were addressing was. I think that's really important, and it's very easy to overlook. And it's kind of one of those things that, at the beginning of a project, you're just misaimed by this much, but down the road, you've missed dramatically because you didn't have that, as you were just describing, that begin with the end in mind, discipline, and I think that upfront discipline is another theme that I've been hearing across it.
Hunter, if you'll allow me to stretch your Mad Libs metaphor a bit further, because I love Mad Libs, but I think that if you'll remember, when you do Mad Libs, you sort of ask for an adjective and a verb, what have you, but the person who's answering doesn't know what the rest of the information is. And I think that you have to Liubov's point, you have to remain curious about the people that you're working with, to Priscilla's point, my background I have a degree in English and a degree in psychology. So I think I ended up working, communicating with people about people is essentially what we do. And it kind of fits, even though I had no interest in being in the industry in the first place. But it's, I think when you remain curious, the respondents' definition of clean was very different from the researchers' definition of clean, because the suds were required, right? That foam was required. What's the color that, there's a lot that's if you start from a point of being curious and you remain curious, those blind spots will eventually all come to first. They'll all make sense at the end. But you have to recognize that there's those blind spots from the beginning. And to your Mad Libs metaphor, you can answer questions or ask questions even if you don't have the whole picture yet. But to just acknowledge that there's that blind spot from the beginning and remain curious throughout, I think is really helpful.
That's a cool exercise to almost say, almost within that process, say, well, what are our potential blind spots? And, we humans, and it sounds like there's a lot of, behavioral science knowledge kind of across us. And as researchers, whether through school or through experience, we have a lot of blind spots. We have a lot of collective memory. We have a lot of subjectivity unintentionally. And so to your point, when we say, well, clean, that creates a very specific picture in our mind. And you discovered, it sounds like through some exploration, almost by accident in some ways, that their definition of clean and what was in their mind was different. Whereas you could have burned a lot of calories around clean, how do you know it's clean, whether trying to tell them how they know when it's clean, to Priscilla's point, and miss the blind spot. So I think that's a really sort of systematizing and recognizing that the search for blind spots up front is probably a really smart, a smart piece of effective research.
I have one add-on to what you have shared before about the fact that we put as an objective to grow the business, and obviously we all do, but when you reframe this question and you drive the internal team obsession about not the products you sell, but the customers you want to make happy with by supporting with these products and the way how these products can change their lives. So then the equation immediately change. So this customer obsession helps a lot to find more unique ways to satisfy their desires and their needs, and that creates this, that uncovers these hidden zones. So being not in love with the product or the solution that you have in mind, but being obsessed and falling in love with the problems of your customers and being customer obsessed. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really cool. Those emotional hidden zones versus those product features and benefits. It's a really nice sort of pivot on the role of research.
I'm dying to know, as an SOMAR member, like I watched it, Carmen and Henry, get this this accolade, but I'm curious from the two of you, like, what did you learn? Like, what is the thing that once you did this that was so effective? Like, what's the thing is included in every project now? Like, I heard a little bit of the pain, Carmen, when you talked at the beginning, like, oh, it wasn't quite successful at the beginning. Some clients we work with would have given up, so I'm kind of curious how you got through that, and then what you're going to do, next to make sure that effectiveness is totally on there.
Actually, the research helped us a lot because the prototypes were not effective. And that's why we, with the support of the research, actually, we managed to drive the developer towards the final outcome, because they didn't embed actually the findings of the research. So actually we were acting as a client of our research. We were acting on making that company to follow all the recommendation of the research company. This is what we actually did. And we also did what you mentioned. Actually, we started the secondary research because first we try to read about virtual reality, all the business case or the case studies that we can find, I could find on internet. So we research a lot. So all this internal research, actually, it was exactly what you said, helped us to define the scope of the qualitative research and the approach that we had to follow. And it was very difficult to, as you also pointed out, to get feedback from children. I mean, we talk about 4 years old children, 6 years old children. So it was very difficult to get their feedback when we talk about emotions. So that's why we, for instance, used emotion cards. And through emotion cards, actually, we were able to identify, the output, and we were able to fine tune the virtual reality animation to this point where it is helpful and it is what we intended to be. So the research partner was great, in the one that we worked this project with, Juana Rengle. So she was amazing, and without her, we wouldn't have been able to successfully implement it.
That's awesome. That using their
takeaway that I'm getting.
Go ahead, Belinda.
Oh, sorry, Hunter. Just a takeaway that I'm hearing is, I think we also need to be really methodical about the tools or the AI or the platforms or the methodology. You know, we sort of skate around in all different kinds of industries in terms of, well, now we're using VR for anesthetic purposes or analgesic purposes, and I think that can speak to some of the way that we do research in general, right? Like, do we need some quanti-qual? Do we need some additional, qual work in addition to the quant study? Do we need to add some quant to that? Do we need to try a different methodology? Are we coding in language? Are we doing, I think that there's something to Liubov's point, every project is different and it's unique. And I think that being really methodical and really intentional about the kinds of things that we're using, the tools we're using, for each project, right? Like, this worked over here, but is VR going to work for an older community? Like, we're working with adults now. Is that something? Are they going to put on VR goggles? Maybe not. So that's something that's really effective for a younger group. But what do we do now? How do we change that? How do we extend this effectiveness into a different community or into a different group?
Yeah, Henry, this, you guys touched as sensitive a topic. I can't think of one more sensitive. And you've mentioned a lot about that language. What kind of following on this discussion, what'd you learn about that? I mean, how did you address that? You said you had to be sensitive. I think everybody on this call and anyone that'll be listening to this is like, I'm sure you did. What were some of the techniques or lessons that if someone's working in, fem care or just sensitive things, what I feed my baby, things where people have a lot of emotion, were there any principles that you picked up that you think could be kind of applied elsewhere?
Well, one thing was just using the language that, I mean, for example, young people would understand themselves. So often there's a lot of terminology around this issue, and you could do a whole literature review and read about it and learn a lot about it, and then try and have that conversation with someone else. And they might really not latch on to exactly what you're saying. Something I was always saying when we're having the early conversations and someone says a thing or presents it, and I would say, okay, imagine yourself as, the boy sitting down there in the classroom, who maybe he watches porn himself. What do those words mean for him? I kind of want to pick on something else that was like a big learning thing. Someone mentioned the right partners, and this was a big thing for us that carried on as well, because for the survey element, we needed robust data metrics, a nationally representative survey. So we went for a Kantar Public, which is a great large research company for that. What we decided not to plan it all out from the beginning about who would be doing different stages or exactly what the stages would look like. So I think a key thing, and this is also key to the point of getting the messages across, also things like cultural sensitivity, engagement, effective engagement with the audience and participating in your work with. So when we did the interviews, we went out again to look at research partners, and we ended up going with a much smaller organization that their primary business wasn't research. It was they were called the Collaborative Trust for Youth Health and Development. So their main thing was connecting with youth organizations, expertise on young people's well-being and psychology, connecting up with people who it's their day-to-day business not to do research, but their day-to-day business to talk and engage with young people, and be helping them. So that infused the whole, I think, success of that, which has been a bit different from some past projects doing that qualitative style research made us rethink, okay, who is best to do this? So that's something that's passed on as well, that we try to get, people in the room who this is their main focus, I suppose. And also just sense checking with young people, the ethics decisions we made about parental consent. For example, we talked to our youth advisory panel, because you can have as adults all of these conversations going about what's wrong, and just to sense check that in the room about, how do you think that would actually feel for you if we did this, if we did that, what do you think is best? Which is another thing we've carried on as well. You can talk to all the experts and stakeholders and sense check with the participants or audience that you're actually trying to reach, and then get a sense, are we actually on the right track?
There was, you mentioned Kantar, Walker Smith of Kantar had a great post yesterday, thinking back in his career, and he said, when I was coming up in research, all the agencies were named after their founder, and he listed about 20 names, and he said now they're all named at like Microsoft, like technology. And he said, we've sort of lost, and perhaps it's the growth in technology, but he said we've started sort of chasing technologies versus the marketing minds, and very little of this conversation has been, I don't think there's been one example of the research effectiveness was a specific technology. I think your point about don't celebrate methodology, celebrate outputs. It's a great lesson. There's a lot of thoughtfulness and the thoughtfulness that goes into this, whether through a worksheet that's created, something really tangible, or something like the cultural sensitivity or the generous objectives that we talked about early, Carmen. That's all very human capital centric. And that's a really interesting theme, because I think if you read LinkedIn or the internet, no, this industry is all tech, it's all AI, it's all big data, it's all, things like that. It hasn't really been mentioned once by any of us. Not to say there's not a role and a value in it, but it's means to an end. And so I think that's a really interesting, at least a general umbrella that I've heard across this.
I do think we're all in the tech business right now. Like, forget it. If you're in business, you're in the tech business.
That's
and
true.
that's why I think to your point, it falls away very quickly. We have to manage the tech, but to what end?
Yeah, so that we can blank. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I knew this time was going to go very quickly. This did not disappoint. I was thinking, we'll have like the top 3 tips. I think we're going to have the top, 53 tips that we'll go back and summarize and share out. But you guys, as expected, over-delivered. I think this is really valuable. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.